Hello, hello. Are the mics
Hello,
working?
hello. Mic check.
Mic check. David, is the mic working? Okay.
How about this one?
Yes.
All right, we're in business. The only housekeeping announcement we're making is that if you need to leave before the program is over, then you're going to miss something wonderful. But if you have to leave, please use the back exits, okay? Okay.
Hello. Blanca and I always have this debate. Who starts? So I will. Welcome, and we're so happy that everyone's here for the Aronson Awards, specifically because this has been some hell of a year, and we need awards for social justice. In this case, it's social justice journalism, but we need to work, we need to organize, we need to do whatever we can to build a country that's grounded on social justice. I want to also recognize the people who are in the stories. We wouldn't have these fabulous winners if it wasn't for people giving stories, sharing stories about their lives. This is not easy, and you'll hear from the winners today how difficult it is to get the trust, and for people who've gone through so much struggle in their lives to be able to share that once again in the hope that their sharing will open doors for community organizing, national organizing, international organizing for justice. We have a new award, and I just want to announce it specifically because there's some students in the house. The new award is the Aronson's Undergraduate Journalism Scholarship. And we're going to have one scholarship a year, and there's money with it and support. And it's for an undergraduate student who's a junior or less, so we can help them really concentrate on learning powerful, wonderful journalism skills. Now I'd like to, you could say a few things?
Well, I want to acknowledge all the people that make this possible, and I want to start with our judges. This is all a labor of love for all of us. We do this because we believe in it. We do this because our lives depend on it. I just taught a class on Japanese internment. So think about that. If there's another attack, what happens, right? So we better be prepared. So first, I'd like to thank the judges. And if you're here, please stand. There's a lot of you, but I'll say it quick. Okay, Pam Brown, Christopher Corey, Annette Danto, Wayne Dawkins, Maria Gramps, Lonnie Isabel, Janine Jackson, Elisa Katz, Cynthia Lopez, Bienvenida Matias, Yoruba Richin, Cecil McCarthy, Ricardo Miranda, Jared Murphy, Alice Slater, Allison Steinberg, and John Tarleton. Thank you all. And that's for the journalism, the cartooning, and the documentary film award. So those are judges in all those categories. We also want to thank, we couldn't do this without a staff. And that's David Pulaski, Peter Jackson, Shasha Feng, who does website, and Kelly Anderson. Thank you all.
We have a dynamite staff. I see you in the back there. Okay. I'm going to ask Jay Roman, the chair of the Department of Film and Media Studies, to come up and say a few words. But before you do, it was a surprise, but something happened. You know, life's all about the details. A little detail was left out. But anyway, Jay, we have a gift for you because of all the years you've supported the Aronson Awards. And I guess you knew that was coming because you got a box with your name on it. The boxes were just for the winners.
I knew it couldn't be for me. I'm amongst a very distinguished crowd here, and I don't consider myself among those
Winners.
with that kind of distinction. Right? I didn't win anything.
Yes,
So-
you did. With sincere gratitude, James Roman, the chair of the Film and Media Studies Department, Hunter College, in recognition of your outstanding work, your dedication and commitment to the James Aronson Award for Social Justice Journalism. And we mean this really sincerely. You really keep us going. Thank you.
Well, thank
And you have kept James Aronson alive here.
Thank you very much.
Okay. In order to have good photos, you have to bear with us. We have little X's on the floor, and everyone has to stand in the X.
Look, now you missed the photo.
Okay. Okay, Jay, now it's your turn.
You know, I've seen these awards for some time. They are hefty. I'm very grateful for this award. You know, I was standing out in the hallway. I was looking at the video montage of James Aronson and his wife, Grams. I joined the faculty back in the 1970s when Jim was on the faculty. And I have to say, as a young faculty member, until I found out more about him, I didn't realize what a distinguished colleague, me, a junior faculty member, was, who was serving side by side with Jim in the department. Of course, I found out all about him, the National Guardian, of course, his commitment to the alternative press. He was a Thomas Hunter. He was our first journalism professor here. He was appointed the Thomas Hunter journalism professor, taught news writing, and as you can see from the montage, he was the first American journalist, he and Grams, his wife, to be invited to China to teach news writing. And so those pictures out there are a great remembrance for me. And he, of course, is the one who started our journalism program. And I was just talking to Chris, one of the judges, and he was asking me, well, how does this award affect the department and our program? Well, it really has. It's helped to bring attention to journalism in the department and Hunter College. It's created a new commitment on the part of the administration, and thanks to Dean Polsky, who's here tonight, to grow our journalism program. And we have really benefited from these awards. So I have to thank everyone associated with these awards, Blanca, Tammy, and everyone else. And of course, our students and our faculty, the judges again, and our very, very special guest this evening. Welcome all of you, and thank you for coming, and thank you for this.
Now we'll hear a few words from Dean Polsky.
Well, good evening. It's my pleasure this evening to welcome you. I guess I'm the official welcomer since I'm the administrator who's here tonight. And I guess you can tell I'm the administrator because I'm the guy wearing the suit and the purple tie that looks like Hunter College colors. So it's an interesting year, I think, to consider the role of social justice journalism. Last year, as I recall, when I came up and gave a few remarks, I spoke about the role of social justice journalism in giving voice to the voiceless in our society. But some might argue that right-wing populist journalism does the same thing, or at least it claims to do so. So it's worth thinking a little bit about the difference between the journalism that we're here to celebrate tonight and what one finds on conservative and even alt-right websites, radio programs, and the like. So I'm going to suggest a few differences. First, what people talk about, because on those sites, in those places, you don't find discussions about police violence, criminal justice reform, environmental degradation, and some of the other topics that we have seen covered in these awards. The second difference and a more fundamental one, I think, is about who is being held responsible for the injustice. Right-wing populism points, or perhaps more accurately, kicks downward at people with even less power, people who are themselves victims of the maldistribution of access and resources in our society. Social justice journalism, by contrast, points a finger at elites with wealth and influence and at systems and structures that reinforce the disparities. Another difference lies in how one views the past. Right-wing nationalism waxes nostalgic for a time when white privilege counted for a lot more than it does today. I won't claim that social justice journalism always avoids the trap of romanticizing the past, but is a lot more honest about recognizing that the victims of injustice today have long suffered from powerlessness and inequality. And finally, in social justice journalism, I find a generosity of spirit that contrasts sharply with the ugly tone that marks so much of right-wing populism, an ugliness on display in particular in the person of its prime political beneficiary, who shall remain nameless in these remarks. One hopes that the audience for right-wing populism becomes disenchanted quickly. And if so, perhaps more people will pay attention to the kind of work that we're here to celebrate this evening with these awards. Thank you.
Well, now I have the pleasure, let me aim this right for the next speaker, of introducing our host for the night. Prize-winning veteran journalist Katie Gray covers health, criminal justice, and education for a range of national publications and is a contributing editor at the Center on Media Crime and Justice at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She also runs the New York University's Urban Journalism Workshop. Katie Gray.
Good evening, everybody. We'll get very quickly to everything. Gary Young landed in the U.S. shortly after 9/11, and he has certainly made his mark. Over the next 12 years, he was a U.S.-based correspondent for The Guardian, his hometown newspaper, if you will, as a Londoner born to parents from Barbados, and as a columnist for The Nation. He's since returned home to the UK, where he remains an editor-at-large of The Guardian and a columnist for The Nation. Whether a quick and dirty short piece or an expansive, long-form narrative, Gary's storytelling flows from his particular lens as a perpetual student and a traveler, observing the world clearly, critically, and with a tremendous amount of care. It is deeply contextualized work, informed by history, culture, geography, migrations, and his quite open-ended interviews with people of varying races and from varying classes. His work is wide-ranging. It is smart, it is gritty, it is elegant. He's written about race, the racial divide, the economic divide, what the politicians don't get. He's riffed on Trump and Trump supporters. Gary writes, "Those thought dangerous and marginal are now not only mainstream, they have power. Immigrants and minorities are fearful. Bigots are emboldened. Minorities are fearful. Discourse is coarsened. Progressive alternatives, while available, have yet to find a coherent electoral voice. Trump's win," he says, "represents an indictment of an entire political culture. It leaves condemned a Democratic Party that could not defeat him, a Republican Party that would not disown him, a mainstream media that failed to scrutinize him, and a social media that spread his lies far faster than any scrutiny could travel. All were found wanting. Now all will be tested."
railroad tracks define the borders of Muncie's social geography, which basically hasn't changed since 1924, when the Lynns were here to raid Middletown. To the north and west is the wealthy and white area of town. To the south, the white working class area. To the southeast, the African American part. Since I've been here, I've become embedded in the town. Some people have told me here that the situation is dire. They don't want incremental change. They need major shifts in how America works or doesn't work for them.
For testing the waters, for going out into the deep, as the scripture says, the Aronson judges present Gary Young with the James Aronson Career Achievement Award.
Thank you, Kathy. I now understand why you were fishing earlier. Are you a Londoner? Well, I was not really. Are you a Londoner? Can I say you're a Londoner? I now understand what that was all about. First of all, I'd like to thank Tammy and Blanca for the hard work that they did. The fact that it's not paid just to get me here and to get the flights and from Britain and all of there's an awful lot of organization goes into something like this, and I'm very grateful. I had a fascinating day today talking to CUNY students, and as someone who's taught as a visiting professor at CUNY College for 2 years. They're among some of the most impressive students I've ever seen, and show the power really of what education can do and be, and that goes for the faculty too. Actually, in one of the classes where I gave a lesson, I started by telling them that I'd studied Russian, French and Russian. That's what I studied to be an interpreter. And one of them said, "So speak Russian then." And then it turned out that there was actually a couple of Russians in the room, and it all got a bit sticky. But I want to start there because when I was a student in Russia, I lived in what was then Leningrad and is now St. Petersburg. And every day in the evening, about 8:45, my hostess, I stayed with a family, would get herself ready to take her dog, a Cocker Spaniel, for a walk. Now, I'm no great lover of cold or dogs, and so I would watch with bemusement as she readied herself for this trip to the local park, and by 8:55, she'd be out the door. You could set your watch by it. One evening when things got a bit less cold, I said, maybe I'll come out for a walk with you. And she said, okay, well, get ready. And there was a little bit more urgency in her voice than I would have imagined. And I was wandering around, still looking for my hat, thinking it's not that warm. And she stood at the door with a lead in her hand. And we just made it out in time, although I wasn't clear in time for what. And then we arrived at the park, and there were all of these other dog walkers all converging on the park at the same time. And I said to her, what is this? It looks like a meeting. And she said, we call this the dog hour. And I said, well, what's that? And she said, well, this is when the state news is on, Vremya, and we don't want to listen to the propaganda, so we walk our dogs. And one of the things that showed me was the distinction between power and influence, that at that time the regime had power, but clearly it had lost influence. But the other was that this collective, non-showy act of civil disobedience against a political culture that had left information sources so polluted they were no longer worthy of even decoding. And there've been many a day since then when I've looked at what passes for news in screen or in print and wished that I did like dogs, just so I could take one for a walk in those moments and see who would join me. Not because either here in America or in Britain, where I live now, we live in a totalitarian state that dictates what the news should be, but because we live in an ostensibly democratic state in which the fate of large sections of society are written out of the news agenda in ways which force a reckoning with the nature of the democracy in which we live. There is this adage in journalism, an old adage, that when a dog bites a man, that's not news. And when a man bites a dog, that's news. And the logic is clear. Things that take place regularly are easily anticipated don't qualify. For that attribute, there must be something rare and unexpected. But sometimes, events ought to derive their potential news value precisely, I think, because they do happen so often. There are things that happen with such regularity and predictability that journalists have simply ceased to recognize their news value, not least if those things are least likely to happen to people most likely to be journalists. So that much of what we've come to accept as commonplace has dulled our curiosity as to why so much of what is commonplace is also unacceptable. That given the prevailing and escalating inequalities and inequities, we simply don't occupy the same world as journalists that we pretend to cover, even when those worlds are right on our doorstep. So there is value, I think, in asking sometimes, why do dogs keep biting people? Who owns these dogs? And why is it that the same people keep being bitten? For an illustration, take this Black Lives Matter moment. It's revealing that as far as anyone can make out, and we don't know for sure because for a long time they weren't counting, there hasn't been a significant increase in the number of black people being killed by the police. What there has been is a growing political awareness about black people being killed by the police that has forced a reckoning with a reality that has existed for several years. So these shootings aren't news in a conventional sense. They are neither rare nor surprising. They are news simply because those who make the news can no longer ignore them. We were forced to recognize them not because of the overwhelming statistical evidence suggesting wrongdoing, not by the testimony of thousands to ill treatment, not by the historical precedent of how certain inequities and injustices work, because we knew all that already. We were forced to recognize them in no small part because while the media were slurring the powerless rather than talking truth to power, people with cell phones did their jobs for them. The world hasn't changed. What's changed is the media's ability to pass off the grotesque as unremarkable. The media, and this works in Britain as well as it does here, episodically discovers these daily realities in much the same way that teenagers discover sex. Urgently, earnestly, voraciously, and carelessly. With great self-indulgence, but precious little self-awareness. They've always been aware of it, but somehow when confronted with it, it nonetheless takes them by surprise. And then their surprise becomes the news. Crikey, look what I found, they say, rather than an admission of ignorance of what the news has been all along, which should be goodness. Look what's been going on while I've been looking elsewhere. And in many sense, this shock on specific issues stands as a metaphor for the broader disorientation about this political moment, both here and in Britain. For the easiest thing for liberals to do in this moment is to succumb to nostalgia, to reminisce about how things have taken a turn for the worse since Donald Trump was elected and Britain voted to leave the European Union, to lampoon our enemies who can resist, ridiculing Nigel Farage or Trump or Kellyanne Conway, and in so doing virtue signal our indignation. It takes no great effort to oppose Trump. He's a thin-skinned charlatan, a self-proclaimed sexual harasser, a blusterer, and a bigot. One need not exhaust any moral energy in making a case against his agenda. One need expend no great amount of political capital attacking him. George W. Bush opposed him. Glenn Beck opposed him. What is far more difficult is understanding the forces that produced him and the appeal that propelled him. Similarly, it requires no penetrating analysis to lament the parlous state of British politics in the wake of Brexit. But Brexit did not create xenophobia or bigotry. And similarly, Trump did not introduce racism to the American polity. He didn't break the mold, he adapted it. Now that's not to underplay how bad this moment is, it's merely to emphasize that this moment has been getting worse for some time, and that it took this small-handed orange horror show to make it real for some. Now there is a really cruel psychic price that we all pay for becoming so accustomed to these obscenities that we cease to recognize them as being obscene. I recently finished writing a book about all of the children and teens who were shot dead in one day in America. On average, in America, 7 children and teens are shot dead every day. I picked a random day and spent around 2 years finding out who these kids were. The 2 things that became clear, the first was that when they were killed, as most of them were, young Black and Latino kids killed in working class areas, most journalists did not feel compelled to follow up the stories because they said, it's just not so surprising that those things would happen in those places. And after a while, it becomes difficult to escape the conclusion that there are places in America where the fatal shooting of a child challenges one's sense of how the country works, a school or a mall or a cinema. And there are places where it simply confirms how it works. And as such, your existence as a working class African American or Latino makes you vulnerable, but your presence in areas where those people live, or most likely to live, renders them collateral. But it also became clear, and this is the second thing, that Black parents, all of the Black parents that I spoke to who lost children that day, had factored in the likelihood that their child might be murdered. When I asked them whether they thought this could happen, to a person, they all said yes. The mother who lost her child in Dallas said, well, I didn't think it would be him, I thought it would be his brother. The father who lost a son in Newark said, you're not doing your job properly as a Black father if you don't think this could happen. The kids died on November the 23rd, 2013, and while many of the people I spoke to thought politicians could make it worse, none that I spoke to then or since assumed the polity was about to make anything better. And that was under a Black president who in his second term had vowed to make gun control a priority. This is what we can get used to and live with. So when it comes to the broader political moment, let's not settle for the cheap balm of deploring the present without at least trying to engage with its connection to the past. For the thing about this new normal is that it is intimately connected to the old normal. That this situation did not fall from a clear blue sky. It was not visited upon us as though from a vacuum. This current moment, the arrival of a new, vile president and the post-Brexit era, is not simply a matter of sequence, one bad thing following another, but of consequence, one terrible agenda made possible by the failure of its predecessor. People have described the situation that we are in both locally and globally, in the Western world, where the hard right has been emboldened, as a threat to democracy. But I think it's more accurate to describe it as the latest predictable iteration of a democracy that is already in crisis. That the crisis produced this, not the other way around. For at least a generation, the global economy has worked according to the golden rule, and that's that those that have the gold make the rules. A night in 2002, Lula da Silva one night won his landslide victory in Brazil's presidential elections. This was a big, big deal. The Workers' Party finally in power. And he warned his supporters, so far it's been easy, but the hard bit starts now. And he wasn't wrong. On the way to his inauguration, the invisible hand of the market tore up his electoral promises and boxed the country around the ear through its reckless democratic choice. In the 3 months between his winning and being sworn in, the currency plummeted by 30%, 6 billion left in hot money, and some agencies gave Brazil the highest debt risk ratings in the world. We're in government but not in power, said his closest aide. Power today is global power, the power of the big companies, the power of finance capital. Under those circumstances, the limited ability for a national government to pursue an agenda that has not been first endorsed by global capital and its proxies is no longer simply the cross we have to bear, it is the cross to which we have all been nailed. The nation state is a primary democratic entity that remains, but the scale of neoliberal globalization shows it's clearly not up to the task. So we pick the candidates and capital picks the agenda. Meanwhile, money can move across the planet far easier than people. There are no borders for money. Nobody stops capital at the frontier and says, how many jobs will you displace, or whom will your profits harm, even as low-paid workers are hunted down like animals and deported like criminals. As Western policies that force people to move dovetail with restrictions on who can move to the West, a number of sordid contradictions that are increasingly becoming both self-evident and unsustainable emerge. We pursue trade policies that underdevelop huge parts of the world, and then when people flee poverty, we close the door. We create instability in huge parts of the world through bombing and providing bombs to others, and then when people flee those bombs, we close the door. We support democracy when democracy supports us in much of the world, and when people try to flee dictatorships we support, we close the door. And then as we nestle in the armed, gated community that the West is still striving to become, we wonder where all the resentment came from. We wonder how this new normal came to be. And as such, we're in a situation where we pursue with Trump and with the new situation with Brexit. What's changed, many things have changed, and worse, I think, is yet to come. But what primarily it feels to me like is a shift in etiquette. They are no longer pretending that the dog whistle has become a wolf whistle, that they are brazen where they were once crafty. And we have let this happen in a similar way that the frog who sits in the pan and someone puts the temperature up gradually can sit there until we have this intolerable, unacceptable moral threshold is breached. And we can all go on about our business when 7 children are killed every day, or when inequality can rise and so on. It becomes part of the normal, which is always moving towards the new normal. And there is no reason, as journalists, why we need to let that happen. After the suburb of Ferguson, Missouri went up in flames, to almost universal condemnation in the media, the Department of Justice conducted a report into how the city was being run. It was, I believe, a report that any enterprising journalist could have produced themselves if they had not become inured to this kind of systemic discrimination. Among other things, the DOJ found that between 2007 and 2014, one woman was arrested twice, spent 6 days in jail, and paid $550 as a result of one instance of illegal parking, for which she was originally charged a $150 ticket. She tried to pay in smaller installments, but the court refused to accept anything less than a full payment, which she couldn't afford. 7 years after the original infraction, she still owed $540. This was how the town raised its revenue. This was not a glitch in the system. It was the system. And then when Ferguson happened, people said, where did that come from? How could that happen? And then there was the 14-year-old boy found in an abandoned building who was chased down by a dog which bit his ankle and his left arm as he protected his face. The boy says officers kicked him in the head and then laughed about it afterwards. Officers said they thought he was armed. He wasn't. DOJ investigators found that every time a police dog bit someone in Ferguson, the victim was black. So it turns out that sometimes dog bites man really is the story, and we keep missing it. Thank you.
I like the way you talk it. I like the way you walk it. I like the way you write it. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Indeed, after the fatal police shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, Nancy Cambria and Lori Screven joined a team of 24 St. Louis Post-Dispatch staffers covering the protests and their aftermath. Together, Nancy, the reporter and writer, and Lori, the photographer and videographer, explored the mental trauma that poverty and violence can impose and its empirically proven impact on children's brain development. In words and pictures, their project, The Crisis Within, How Toxic Stress and Trauma Endanger Our Children, does spotlight that trauma, but also the resilience of young people and their families who say that at times they feel as if they're in a war zone. Nancy and Lori, thank you and congratulations.
Hello. What an honor to be here. Thank you so much. Lori lives in Clayton, Missouri, and I live in Belnor, Missouri, 5 minutes from downtown Ferguson. We've been reporters with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch longer than I can remember. I wanted to say a couple things. First, about the Trump era. There's been this really kind of neat little bump in newspaper subscriptions, particularly along the national and ProPublica kind of bent donations. We're not seeing that at the metropolitan level. So I wanted to say that this project over 7 months would not have happened without the support of the Annenberg Center for Health Journalism at University of Southern California. That gave us the focus, and my paper, the drive, and the time for us to do this project. So we're very grateful. Those are really important resources in that middle market America. I want to talk a little bit about the first initial coverage of Ferguson, because Lori and I were dispatched out, Lori particularly as a photographer. I'm the children and families reporter, but it was all hands on deck. But I think Lori and I saw some things differently that led to this project. One of the things I noticed particularly were the amount of children that were on the protest lines. And what did this mean? Many parents, and not just parents living in Ferguson or African American parents, but parents from upper middle class neighborhoods as well were bringing children because they knew they were seeing something very important. But the children, many of them toddlers, were not seeing it that way. So that was very fascinating to me. But I think some of the images that stuck with me in those initial days of that unrest in Ferguson, for me, it was at a Red Cross drop-in center where residents in Ferguson were coming for all sorts of help, and there was a giant box of green beans, the size of a refrigerator box. And residents were just dipping their hands into this sweaty box of green beans on this very hot August day in desperation. It was bringing them comfort. And I talked to some counselors that day, and they said, well, you have to understand, this has been very traumatic. There's helicopters, there's tear gas, there's gunfire in the surrounding neighborhoods, there is this massive militarized police presence in their backyards. But they're also reliving a lot of past trauma. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, these are families that have grown up in poverty. Many have migrated out to the suburbs from the city. And many sad things have happened in their lives. And it struck me then that we had cycles of trauma that were deeply impacting families and children. And the research, thanks to USC and the Annenberg's fellowship, helped me really understand how deeply that can impact children, right down to brain development, behavioral development, neural development, even the way DNA expresses itself in the body. But there's one other image that really got this going, and that was a picture Lori took during the initial days of the protesting. And it was a picture of two adults pushing a stroller. But there wasn't a child in the stroller. There was all sorts of merchandise, groceries, diapers, other things in the stroller. That was a very, very controversial picture in our newspaper because the lens that Ferguson was reported, and a necessary lens, was showing all sorts of different aspects. And people were thinking these families were looting. No, they were just living there. The roads were shut down, and they were trying to make it, somebody said, taking care of business. And so I think that's what set us off on our journey to cover these families for 7 months. And the struggle is real. This is a very segregated community. Every day there was some sort of trauma, gun violence, trying to pay the bills, trying to keep the heat on, dealing with an incarcerated relative, on and on went those different specific things. And yet, what Lori and I found in meeting with these families, who were incredibly kind to let us in, patient with us, as we sometimes had to knock on their doors when they didn't want us there, as they sometimes put their own safety in jeopardy by allowing us to write about their personal lives, fear of losing their children to foster care because they didn't have power in their house, and at times the kids were sent off to live with friends because they could not support them. Those were incredible things. But what we saw continually was resilience in these children, to the point where one of our children that we covered, and her nephew, her name was Destiny, was out on a beautiful fall day doing cartwheels with her cousin. And Lori, why don't you finish it?
Hi, I'm Laurie. I made the photographs for Nancy's story. And I wanted to say one other thing to build upon what Gary was saying about trust in mainstream media. And we are the metropolitan paper in St. Louis, so a lot of the injustices that you pointed out that happened in Ferguson, that was happening. Like, we were reporting on some of it, but not nearly as in depth as the Department of Justice went into. So building the trust with these families was no small task, especially after a year of Ferguson. We started our reporting, I guess, right at the 1-year anniversary. And this neighborhood, most of the kids that we photographed and we told their stories, Mike Brown was shot on Canfield Drive, and this neighborhood, like, all the kids live either, I don't know, a block away or 4 blocks away. So media saturation, when everyone showed up, there was this big question of, like, why are you guys here now? Why do you care? So that was a valid concern expressed by these residents, and it just took a lot of us coming back daily at all hours. But the photo that Nancy's talking about, and it did flash up here. I was just hanging out. I would find Destiny and her little cousin Anthony. I would meet them often after, up at the bus stop when they got off of school. Akila, or 3 of the kids that we photographed, they all lost one of their classmates who was killed in a drive-by shooting. And so that day, we're just out, or the kids are out playing, and the kids, they're leading some cartwheel routine, and at the end of it, they just, like, dropped down on their knees and started praying. And Destiny's grandmother, who has custody of both of the kids, they started praying after Jamila was shot every morning for their safety. That's how they started off their day. Jamila, ironically, had Akila would come over, like, and they'd all pray together. The day that they just dropped to their knees to pray, I made pictures and I just asked them, and they were just praying. They're like, we pray so we don't get shot. And I remember I called you, like, minutes after. I was like, oh my gosh, you'll never believe, like, what I just witnessed in children's play. These children have just been surrounded by death. Destiny's father was killed 2 years earlier. They were, they saw the protests, the tear gas from Mike Brown. Their 9-year-old classmate just gets shot, and here these kids are most vulnerable, are just worried about living.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy and Lori. Before she became a staff writer covering gun violence at The Trace, Sara Riley was at the New York Daily News, where she came across a lawsuit involving a woman who had been accused of crime, then cleared of those crimes, but nevertheless faced an attempted court-ordered eviction. A narcotics lab test had cleared that woman's name. It turns out that she was one among many tenants, mainly persons of color, who had also been falsely accused and consequently threatened with eviction. Nancy's project, Nuisance Abatement, published by the Daily News and ProPublica, resulted in several key reforms, including passage of New York City's Criminal Justice Reform Act and its Nuisance Abatement Fairness Act. Sara also recently won the Pulitzer Prize for that work. Sara.
Thank you, and I want to thank in particular the judging committee, the organizers, Tammy and Blanca, and the students and faculty. I'm really honored to receive this award. Tammy had asked me to talk about how the NYPD's use of the nuisance abatement law is an extension of stop and frisk, broken windows, and other policing tactics that are unfairly and often brutally wielded against communities of color in New York City. In many ways, Jamila Al-Shabazz and her family have suffered every one of these injustices. We first met Jamila more than 3 years ago when we were working on an investigation into police misconduct lawsuits that the NYPD was willfully ignoring. In 2011, the NYPD's most sued officer, Detective Peter Valentine, had led a raid on Jamila's home, along with 4 others in the same building on Kelly Street in the Bronx. The cops turned up little in the way of narcotics, but they hauled off more than a dozen people, including Jamila, her son, and her sister, in handcuffs in front of all of their neighbors and a waiting television crew. For the arrest in Jamila's apartment, Detective Valentine claimed he had seized 45 paper cups of powder cocaine. Jamila and her son, like so many other people, almost always black or Hispanic, were locked up on Rikers Island for a week while their cases were pending in the courts. The charges were dropped when the lab test came back negative for narcotics. The powder was actually crushed eggshells that she used in a spiritual ritual. Jamila said it took months to repair the damage that had been done to her apartment. Detective Valentine was hit with a few lawsuits from those raids. They were among more than 24 filed against him during his short career at the NYPD, costing the city hundreds of thousands of dollars in payouts. But he suffered no repercussions for his mistakes or for any of the trouble that he put these families through. He was allowed to continue working, actually until after a story came out when he was taken off the streets. This, of course, wasn't the first contact that Jamila or her family members had had with the NYPD. She lives in one of the most heavily policed neighborhoods in New York City. The police were constantly stationed outside of her building. She said that every time her 3 sons would come and go, they would stop and frisk them, harass them, ask them where the drugs were at. What happened to her family after the raid in 2011 was, in many ways, an escalation of everything that had come before. 4 months later, she got a call from her son. A lawyer and a team of police officers had shown up at their home with a padlock order. Her entire family, including her young children, she had a baby, an elementary school-aged daughter at the time, and then a son who was in high school. They all had to be out immediately. She wasn't even given the opportunity to come home to collect her belongings, including the food that she used to feed her infant son. Jamila was facing a nuisance abatement action, which is a civil lawsuit that the NYPD files against places that it claims are being used illegally. Police Commissioner Bratton, back in the 1990s, had called the nuisance abatement law the most powerful civil tool available to the police. It allowed them to sweep down on a location and close it without warning. At the time, the NYPD filed about a few hundred cases a year, primarily against businesses that were fronts for illegal enterprises. The court documents in Jamila Al-Shabazz's case alleged that her apartment was being used for drug trafficking on account of the 45 paper cups of cocaine that were seized during the raid. The court papers made no mention of the fact that just a few months earlier, or 4 months earlier rather, a lab test had come back and shown that the powder was actually not narcotics at all, and the charges have been dismissed. We found that 9 out of 10 of the nuisance abatement cases that the NYPD filed a year, and we looked at over 1,100 of them filed over an 18-month period, were filed against businesses and homes in predominantly black or Hispanic neighborhoods. Most of them were filed over flimsy drug charges that did not lead to convictions. They amounted to collective punishment of entire families for the alleged actions of just 1 or 2 people. Jamila's first court date in her nuisance abatement case was just a few days after she was shut out of her home. In order to save her entire family from becoming homeless, she had to agree to bar her 22-year-old son, Akeem, from her home for the rest of his life. Now, at that point, her son, Akeem, had never actually been convicted of a crime. He had had some run-ins with the police over minor offenses. She admitted that he wasn't perfect, but they were possession charges that were dismissed. And for all intents and purposes, he had a clean record. But that's what nuisance abatement is. If they can't get rid of you through the criminal courts, They use the civil courts, where there are fewer protections for the accused. There's no right to an attorney. There's a lower standard of proof. And sometimes we found that the judge wasn't even in the room during the proceedings. It was just the tenants fending for themselves against the NYPD's lawyer. Several of the tenants that I spoke to were actually confused, and they thought that the NYPD's lawyer, who was very friendly, was their court-appointed attorney that was there to advise them. They didn't realize that it was, some people actually didn't even realize that it was civil court, and they thought that if they didn't sign the settlement that they would get sent to jail, or they didn't realize that they weren't entitled to an attorney in civil court, and so they signed. For Jamila, the idea of ostracizing her son, barring him from her home for life, was unconscionable. In fact, so much so that she refused to believe that she had done it. Even after I showed her the settlement agreement, it was almost as if she blocked it from her memory because of the trauma. She said, how am I gonna bar my son from my home that I'm still raising? Who does that? I'm not doing that. Who does that? Like, really, who does that? But that's essentially what the law was doing. It was tearing families apart. We found about 300 people that were barred from homes or were forced to give up their leases during the 18-month period that we looked at. For everyone that we could find the race or ethnicity on, nearly everyone was Black or Hispanic. More than half of them had not been convicted of a crime as a result of the underlying allegations, and scores actually weren't even prosecuted for one. So this is how Broken Windows works. Broken Windows, or at least what it has become over the years, employs the most extreme enforcement measures for every offense, whether it be bicycling on the sidewalk, possessing a small amount of drugs, or even just coming and going from your own building. It targets the areas with the highest crime rates, which are often poor communities of color. And the police use broken windows to make an example out of everyone in the community, under the theory that it will scare off a small number of people, statistically just 1 or 2% of the population, from committing more serious offenses. So the biggest thanks for this award, of course, goes to the people like Jamila, who selflessly shared their stories with us over the course sometimes of several years, stories that were often among the most painful and humiliating experiences of their lives, in the hopes that they would somehow motivate those in power to change. Their stories were cited by countless politicians and resulted in sweeping reforms to the nuisance abatement law, I'm proud to say. And Jamila and 2 of the other people featured in our stories are also lead plaintiffs right now in a class action civil rights lawsuit that's pending in court. And so hopefully the the settlement that bars her son from her home is technically still in place. So technically, if the NYPD saw her son at her home, they could shut it down immediately still. So if she prevails in court, then that settlement will be overturned. And of course, I also want to thank all the people at the New York Daily News and ProPublica. There were so many people who worked really hard on this project. I think 3 of the best editors that I've ever worked for are actually here in the room: Jennifer Stahl, Jim Rich, and Eric Kamansky. I think he's here somewhere. They put a lot of work in on this. So on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for recognizing this work.
Pat Bagley is the 2017 recipient of the James Aronson Cartooning with Conscience Award. Cartoons of an impeached, embattled Richard Nixon during the Watergate scandal formed the core of Pat Bagley's first self-styled lessons in editorial cartooning. They were, he says, his Rosetta Stone as he figured out how politics works, including in Utah, the red state where he lives, and for the last 38 years has parsed politics and has had his decidedly liberal, anti-establishment illustrations published in the pages of the Salt Lake Tribune. Congratulations, Pat.
So it's called the Cartooning with a Conscience Award. So I feel like I have to apologize for Utah giving us Orrin Hatch, Mike Lee, Jason Chaffetz. Do these names sound familiar? So I get a lot of questions from people here and in other places. What is a liberal cartoonist doing in Utah? It's a very good question. Well, I can turn it around. I mean, why did you guys give us Donald Trump? I mean, I had a very difficult time coming out here. I started in Salt Lake City, and Delta Airlines kept on pushing back. They delayed our flight. And I just barely walked in here. But they felt so bad about delaying the flight that the beatings were complimentary. Now, I wasn't always a liberal cartoonist. Now, I actually started out as fairly, well, I was right-wing. I was very conservative. I actually knocked doors for Richard Nixon growing up in California. And I was on my way to being a college Republican. I remember going to this meeting, and it was this business group, this Chamber of Commerce types, and it's 15 years old, and they're grooming me to be, you know, a good little college Republican. And I remember sitting there listening to this guy, and he went on about welfare cheats. You know, that made me angry. And then he went on about how government never does anything right. And he told lots of stories about how government really screws things up. That also made me very angry. And then he said, mark my words, Social Security and Medicare are a Ponzi scheme. They're going to go bankrupt in the next 10 years. That was 45 years ago. Okay, so since that time, there are several things that I just don't believe anymore. I mean, I don't believe in the Easter Bunny. I don't believe in Santa Claus. I don't believe in supply-side economics. Trickle-down economics doesn't work. But there's one thing that I am absolutely sure of in all that time, through all that experience, and that is that we are all in this together. So anyway, thank you very much for the award.
Busted, a series jointly published by ProPublica and the New York Times, began as a search for stories on plea bargain deals that comprise a disproportionate share of criminal court dockets. These are the cases that some defense attorneys and criminal justice reformers complain are implicitly, systemically unfair to the largely poor, seemingly powerless defendants who feel plea deals are their best bet. Diving deep into that subject, ProPublica reporters Ryan Gabrielson and Topher Sanders asked precisely what role forensic evidence actually plays in such cases, considering that more than 90% of criminal convictions arise from these guilty pleas. Among other things, they culled from the National Registry of Exonerations database to uncover dozens of overturned drug convictions in Texas, where, as it turns out, innocent people were pleading guilty to allegations based on faulty evidence from a flawed $2 lab test for drugs. The Aronson Committee judges particularly noted these reporters' tenacity in the face of intimidation and the government's bid to block their investigation. Congratulations, Ryan and Topher.
I'll go first. I'll do the thank yous, and Ryan will say something profound. Thank you to Hunter College. Thank you to the Aronson Committee and to the judges. Thank you to the coordinators and the directors that helped put this together. It's a real honor to be here among all these fine journalists, and this is really important work. we all know that there's been some changes in our world, and the work is very, very important to these communities. We hold a lot of power as journalists, and I hope that we're seeing that with the impact that the work can have. And so I'm just, I'm humbled, and thank you very much for this honor.
I don't promise anything profound from my mouth. I second everything Topher said, and I would like to add a thanks to someone who I don't believe is here, Joe Sexton, our editor, who brought not only brilliance, but a really essential fury. Once he sort of, the sort of scope and outrage of the story came clear, he, really full support and helped power a lot of the really intense and sometimes tedious work that we did. We live in a remarkably prejudicial society where subjective color field tests that might have turned a certain color, or maybe that's just what the officer believes he saw, is not sufficient proof of guilt to create a felony record. Or a police suspicion or the term known to police is enough to evict someone from their homes. I think in the press, oftentimes we focus, when we think of injustice, we think of 20 years or the death penalty, and rightly so. We need to focus a lot of energy on making sure that those sort of irreversible harms are reversed when the people are innocent. But I think a lot of times we overlook and set aside and maybe count as very routine and not newsworthy things like a small-time felony record and the effect that they can have to really destroy someone's life, or an eviction and the toll that can have. And so I would, if I have anything to say, it's to urge us to look for this small that can have these massive impacts on individuals' lives. And as a chief beneficiary of the Trump bump in funding of major news outlets, I'd just like to say that if you want to keep the nation's news engine churning, fund local reporting, and fund local reporting. And thank you, everyone at Hunter College, again.
The next award goes to the staff of the Texas Tribune for their major project, Bordering on Insecurity. No sooner than then-candidate Donald Trump said he would build a wall to block the flow of immigrants across the nation's southern border, 50 of the Texas Tribune staffers set out to follow the human beings and the money behind that vote-garnering campaign slogan. For a year, Tribune staffers traveled through violence-torn Central America to the most heavily crossed stretch of the U.S.-Mexico border and to the U.S. workplaces where so many immigrants toil, sometimes obscurely, in low-wage, exploitative jobs. Their stories, Tribune staffers say, shine a light on U.S. demand for illegal drugs and undocumented labor, and on the wholesale smuggling of human beings that feeds the appetites of some Americans.
It's easy to fear the border, but then you run across all these kids traveling alone, kids fleeing lives of desperation, kids who are coming here to join their undocumented parents. That's where the big numbers are down here. It's the kids and the family units, as they're called. They are the ones who are pushing up the apprehension figures. And they don't run, they turn themselves in.
Veteran Texas newspaperman Jay Root, who never took a journalism class but got hooked on journalism while working on his college paper, is accepting the award.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks to Hunter College and to the judges. I sort of feel out of place here because I'm with so many great people who have done so many great things, and really all I did was, when my editor made me a full-time investigative reporter in early June of 2015, she asked me to come up with an idea that the entire staff could look into, and I didn't know what to do. And not long after that, I was watching TV and I saw Donald Trump announcing for president, and he put Mexico and immigration in his crosshairs. And I just thought the speech was just unbelievable. And I thought, this is it. Border security, that's what we call, I mean, some people thought that we shouldn't use the word, border security, because that's the words of the people who use it to kind of create fear. But I felt it was important. And so we came up with a title that sort of played on that. It's called Bordering on Insecurity. And I've never done anything, I don't think, journalistically that sustained for a year. It was actually more like 18 months because we started in the summer. And that was really the most challenging thing of this. We had people that went out on maternity leave. We had people that left, or that, we hired new people. So it was a struggle just logistically and keeping up with all of that. But we laid it out in 4 parts. And that was the idea, and we stuck with it, and the template, I think, really worked. So we focused on crime, the issue, sanctuary cities and all of that. And of course, we discovered that a lot of the things that we've been told really aren't true. We actually did what I think is a first of its kind study on who's in our jails, and we found that undocumented immigrants are actually being incarcerated in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice at a lower rate than in the population. We interviewed a guy who had been locked up for about 40 days on a detainer, reserved for non-citizens. It turns out he was a citizen of the United States. In the second part, we decided to focus on corruption on our side of the border, because we hear quite a lot about corruption in Latin America, but we don't talk much about corruption of our own law enforcement agents. And so we focused on corruption inside the U.S. Border Patrol. In the third installment, we decided to focus on the conditions in Latin America, and I went to El Salvador, which is the murder capital, was at the time, murder capital of the world. And we got into some luck journalistically when we were interviewing the top law enforcement official there, and his little bat phone went off, and there was a confrontation between gang members and the police, and we made our way to the crime scene, and it was absolutely gruesome. And we actually ended up making a documentary based on some of this. It's called Beyond the Wall. It's running on more than 20 PBS stations. We had a similar situation where we were talking to a border rancher, and while we were talking to him, a load of immigrants crossed his properties right on the Rio Grande. And we look behind, we're filming this as it's happening, and a load comes across in a raft, and had this bizarre moment where these smugglers told us to quit filming them. But we got a lot of it, and so again, those are some scenes that are in this documentary that we have. That actually is not part of the project because it came out afterwards. But the real reason why I think that it does fit into social justice, and this is what Mr. Young was talking about earlier. This really is a dog bites man sort of story. This happens every day, day in and day out. People are crossing the border, and they're coming here, and drugs are crossing the border because we're buying them. We're buying the drugs, and we're hiring the workers. And so, at one point in the documentary, I say, surely in the red state of Texas, we're doing everything we can, right, to stop this. But no, we're not. There is, we talk about extreme vetting. There is no extreme vetting in the Texas workplace. It's wide open. And that's where, I think that we look in the mirror, and I think we need to look in the mirror, and we need to look at our own complicity in the mess that we've created. And I hope you'll watch Beyond the Wall. It's online now. You can get it at the Texas Tribune. So thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
This year's Integrated Media Arts Documentary Filmmaking winner is Betty Yu, a 2016 Hunter College Master of Fine Arts graduate. Her film, 3 Tours, tracks U.S. military veterans Nicole Goodwin, Ramon Mejia, and Ryan Holleran as they battle the post-traumatic stress that their deployment to Iraq ignited, and as they employ that hard, transformative suffering in their current quest for adequate mental health treatment for veterans and an end to wars they view as unjust. As an interdisciplinary multimedia artist, educator, and community activist, Betty, a Chinese American, says her experience as the daughter of garment workers, of sweatshop workers who came here from Hong Kong 37 years ago, unequivocally frames her work. And that ongoing work also explores, among other issues, labor rights, immigration, immigrant justice, and gender equity.
I was a 92 Yankee. That's unit supply specialist. Unit supply was something similar to a 9-to-5. And there were days where I completely loved it, and there were days when I was just sick of it. It was a job, but it was fun until the war started, and then it wasn't fun anymore. It wasn't fun to decide who would get flak vests without any Teflon protection on them. I recall before I left in April not being certain about anything, wondering what side am I on? Are we doing the right thing?
I feel like I was so innocent back then because I turned 20 in Iraq. I was kind of very blind as to what was going on in the world. I was blind to what was going on in politics. I didn't care what was going on in the world. I kind of cared about what was going on in my own bubble, and then that was it.
Stationed in a rather obscure part of Iraq, the Maysan province. So while conducting patrols, I don't know how I'd never asked myself that question before I actually got there. But when actually seeing the Iraqis, the local nationals, and engaging with them, it's hard not to ask yourself what we're doing there.
Congratulations, Betty.
I'm a little short, so I'm gonna pivot this up. Thank you so much. I have my notes on my phone, so sorry if I look down for a second. Thanks to the Aronson Awards Selection Committee, to Hunter College, to the staff, to Tammy and Blanco, and I know David and Peter, who as you can tell, I went to Hunter College, so I know the staff by name. I want to really, really thank the veteran community, particularly the community, the Iraq Veterans Against the War organization that I collaborate with for over 4 years in making this film. I'm not sure if Nicole is here. Maybe you can wave your hand if you are there. There's Nicole. I don't know if it's okay for a second. I wanted her to come up here, if it's possible, to accept the award with me. I just want to thank Nicole Goodwin and Ramon Mejia and Ryan Holleran for allowing me to follow them for about 4 years and documenting their lives. I think that they are testament to the fact that people can change and become agents of change. From Nicole and Ryan and Ramon, there were so many people, veterans that I worked with and partnered with and understood that many people joined the military not because they believed in Bush's war, not because they were Republican, but because it was an economic draft. There were people who joined because they had no other choice. The film that is almost an hour long, of course, follows the story of Nicole, who is from Brooklyn and Harlem, and she basically saw the military as a way to escape poverty and the life that she was living. And so I just want to say that at this moment in time, obviously in our history right now, in our moment that we're in history, that we all know that there's been an increase in troops to Iraq, to Syria, to the Middle East in general, to Afghanistan. We know what's been going on. And I think that it's important to challenge this falsehood that drone warfare is the kinder, gentler, less severe form of war, because as we know, the casualties are severe on both sides, both PTSD among the people who are operating the drones, right? There's a wonderful film out, National Bird, that talks about that, as well as the hundreds of people who do get killed by drone warfare. And I just want to say that it's been really, really incredible to have these relationships, to build these relationships over the years. Nicole has found healing through poetry and acting and performing. Ramon, who's a Mexican-American, converted to Islam and became an activist. Ryan Holleran came out of the closet when he was on his way from Kuwait to Iraq to fight. And he became an activist as well. And all of them, what they share in common is that their experience in Iraq and fighting in Iraq in combat, they became anti-war agents of change because they themselves saw what was happening, what they were doing. And I think that, again, that what is really, really powerful is that folks who are on the ground seeing what's happening are, the truth tellers, or speaking truth to power. And I think what I really admire about veterans and the folks in IVAW and the anti-war community is that they understand that their healing is inextricably tied to those refugees in Iraq, to those people in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, wherever they may be, those war refugees, their livelihoods, right? How we've ruined their lives, right, with the environmental toxins and millions who've been killed and murdered in Iraq. That the lives of veterans and their healing process is tied to calling for the end to war crimes, and this continues. The last thing I just want to really say briefly is I cannot thank enough. This was my thesis film. I cannot thank enough Kelly Anderson, who's right here, who was really an amazing structure of support in so many ways I can't even describe. And I really am so grateful for Kelly in many, many ways. And also Shanti and Reiko, who are two other professors who were my advisors on the film. I just screened this film in New Mexico and Albuquerque, and there are, from those of you that may know, there's a huge amount of military bases there, and a number of veterans who came to the screening, as well as family members thanked me, and people broke down in tears. And I think that I'm going to continue, and I hope to continue using this film as a conversational piece. It is an overtly anti-war film. I didn't want to make a typical activist film, right? We've seen protests over and over again. I wanted to tell this story through I wanted to tell this film, tell this anti-war story through people's stories like Nicole. I want to thank my family, my mom, my sister is here, my partner John, and brother-in-law. And I want to also thank Art Matters Foundation for funding this. Last thing I wanted to just say is that just remember that 24 veterans take their own lives every day. Where I filmed, the most suicides in 1 year in 2010. Ryan's story, who you flashed briefly, the most suicides in 2010, and it increases. So this is not going away. This is obviously only going to get worse under 45. I'm not going to say his name, and I'm hoping that this film will continue to reach a lot of different populations. So yeah.
Can she say 2 seconds?
If it's okay for Nicole to say one thing.
I just wanted to say thank you to Betty, because telling stories matter, and the audiences we tell them to matter. And this is a great honor to be here tonight, and thank you very much.
Philadelphia magazine published Gayborhood Racism, covering acts of racial discrimination in Philadelphia's LGBTQ community. 25-year-old Ernest Owens produced that work, tackling long-standing racism within that community and profiling the activists forming a frontline offensive against that racism. The work resonated with him personally and professionally, he said, as an openly gay Black man. It reaffirmed for him the reasons why he answered the call to journalism. Ernest, congratulations.
Wonderful. I'll wait. Okay. Well, I'll wait. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this award. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you so much for this award. I have so many people I really want to thank for this. More so, I want to thank my family who has supported me. I want to thank my mother, my loving boyfriend, my friends who came here all the way from Philadelphia, my great friend Sharon Cooks, who is an incredible trans woman who was at the DNC, trans woman of color who's done amazing work. I want to thank the Black and Brown Workers Collective, Abdul Ali Muhammad, who is here tonight, who's one of the co-founders, Shani, and other people who have put their bodies on the line to do this. I want to thank my editor, Tim Haas, my other editor, Tom McGrath, and Philadelphia Magazine, and G Philly for allowing us to have real LGBTQ news in a time where people only think of us as doing issues about marriage, and there's more in this community beyond just marriage and issues like that. I want to thank the National Association of Black Journalists. The national president is right here in this room, Ms. Sarah Glover. Thank you for being a mentor to me, and thank you. And for showing the importance that social justice issues can be covered by people of color and those issues. I'm happy to be openly gay and Black and to be able to cover issues that impact Black people, and the fact of building these relationships with these communities as a person of color that report those issues is very important. And when we talk about, thank you. When we talk about diversity in newsrooms and getting to the bottom of these issues, the only reason why we hadn't had this issue of racial discrimination in these communities, for me, when I went to the University of Pennsylvania, which is the alma mater of our current president, I went to those clubs with great friends that are here tonight, such as my friend Nina Blaylock, who's here. When I used to go to the Gayborhood bars, I didn't think about the impact that gay people can actually be racist people. Like any other community, anti-blackness anywhere is anti-blackness everywhere. And when I went to those clubs and I went to those experiences, I didn't realize that the intersectionality and the issues that impact intersectionality, the role in which that had on my identity, that in many ways I would have to suppress my blackness in order to enter these queer spaces, or the same way I had to suppress my queer identity in black spaces, and that in many ways this oppression is real and it's institutional. It's institutional in bars with our owners that use the N-word to refer to their former individuals, their former employees. It is in dress code policies that say no Timberlands. It's in television shows that take and culturally appropriate trans individuals, drag culture, music, and my looks and my aesthetics, and then remind me and tell me every day that I'm less than. But for some reason, my look, my skin color, my blackness, and everything that is who I am, that creates the movements that give people life. When you look at the black trans women and black people of color who did Stonewall and the work that they do and how they're erased every day, I do this work because of the fact that if I wasn't to tell this story, then this story would not be told. And it was because of a lack of resources that silence people, government intervention, intimidation that continues to plague these communities and nonprofits. When we talk about HIV and AIDS and medication and the work that has impacted these individuals, it is because of a lack of diversity that is systematic, institutional. So I want to be able to, as a black journalist, getting this award, talking about issues that impact people of color and social justice issues that happen in cities like Philadelphia, New York, and other places, that I am honored to receive this award. I thank people like the Aronson Awards and the committee for voting for me, for voting for a 25-year-old black gay man in 2017. Thank you for that. Thank you. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Brian Bienkowski, I love you most of all. Our next winner, Brian Bienkowski, is editor of Environmental Health News and its sister site, The Daily Climate. Brian was collecting data for a story about water quality on the Crow Reservation of Montana when he realized the issue extended far beyond that region. His year-long probe of Native Americans who in assorted ways were petitioning the government for clean water yielded stories involving the Crow, the Menominee Indians of Wisconsin, and the Coast Salish tribes in the Pacific Northwest. Brian wrote stories about environmental justice and about culture, about how tainted water makes a body sick, and how the lack of water disrupts the very rituals of these Indians that they find life-enlarging and soul-sustaining. Brian?
Well, I already felt like a lightweight or maybe a bantamweight, and then I have to follow that with all these great publications. I won't be too long. This all kicked off with a little tiny study in a little tiny journal about the Crow Reservation and uranium contamination. And I hopped on a plane and went out there, and I was driving around with Emery Three Irons, who's a really fascinating young man, researcher, Crow member. And I'm from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, far from Fifth Avenue. And it's, you know, heavily, a lot of trees and what have you. And I was out in the plains in Montana, and I said, man, there's nothing out there. And Emery looked at me and said, there's everything out there. I felt like an idiot. But he went on to show me, you know, Sundance areas and all these places where they would fish or do sweat lodges. And I went out there thinking this was a story of human health, which it certainly is. But it was also the fact that their culture was struggling to survive. And this branched out to other tribes, and these certainly legacy contaminants like uranium are still a problem, but you know, new environmental issues, you know, with whether it's climate change, endocrine disruption, pharmaceuticals in our water, these are disproportionately impacting tribes as well. And the most important thing I learned from Emory was to not say anything more than you need to. So I'm gonna be done.
So a final round of applause for y'all. Yeah. I am awed by how much amazing journalism gets done at a time when it's so hard to do journalism. I am all the more awed that a 25-year-old wants to come into this craft. I salute y'all for telling stories that have the capacity to redeem and correct and to clarify. Keep on. And Tammy's going to tell us what to do next.
The fun's just begun. We have a reception upstairs. You could take the elevators when you go outside right over here to our right and go one flight, or you could walk the stairs. It's one flight, it's fifth floor, and follow the signs. It's in what we call the black box. It's a wonderful reception that David and our crew put together. So forwards and on.